perceptibly, and the boy felt better. The man hadn't participated in the discussion, and in fact hadn't said a word up until that point. But the boy was already used to the language of the world, and he could feel the vibrations of peace throughout the tent. Now his intuition was that he had been right in coming. The discussion ended. The chieftains were silent for a few moments as they listened to what the old man was saying. Then he turned to the boy. This time his expression was cold and distant. 2,000 years ago, in a distant land, a man who believed in dreams was thrown into the dungeon and was sold as a slave, the old man said, now in the dialect that the boy could understand. Our merchants bought that man and brought him to Egypt. All of us know that whoever believes in dreams also knows how to interpret them. The elder continued. When the Pharaoh dreamed of cows that were thin and cows that were fat, this man I'm speaking of rescued Egyptian from famine. His name was Joseph. He too was a stranger in a strange land like you, and he was probably about your age. He paused, and his eyes were still unfriendly. We always observe the tradition. The tradition saved Egypt from famine in those days and made the Egyptians the wealthiest peoples on earth. The tradition teaches men how to cross the desert and how their children should marry. The tradition says that an oasis is neutral territory because both sides have oases and so both are vulnerable. No one said a word as the old man continued. But the tradition also says that we should believe the messages of the desert. Everything we know was taught to us by the desert. The old man gave a signal, and everyone stood. The meeting was over. The huqars were extinguished, and the guards stood at attention. The boy made ready to leave, but the old man spoke again. Tomorrow we are going to break the agreement that says that no one at the oasis can carry arms. Throughout the entire day we will be on the lookout for our enemies. When the sun sets, the men will once again surrender their arms to me. For every 10 dead men among our enemies, you will receive a piece of gold. Arms cannot be drawn unless they go into battle. Arms are as capricious as the desert, and if they are not used, the next time they might not function. If at least one of them hasn't been used to the end of the day tomorrow, one will be used on you. When the boy left the tent, the oasis was illuminated only by the light of the full moon. He was 20 minutes from his tent, and he began to make his way there. He was alarmed by what had just happened. He had succeeded in reaching through to the soul of the world, and now the price of having done so might be his life. It was a frightening bet. But he had been making risky bets ever since the day he had sold his sheep to pursue his personal legend. And as the camel driver had said, to die tomorrow was no worse than dying any other day. Every day was to be lived or to mark one's departure from this world. Everything depended on one word, maktub. Walking along in the silence, he had no regrets. If he died tomorrow, it would be because God was not willing to change the future. He would at least have died after having crossed the strait, after having worked in a crystal shop, and after having known the silence of the desert and Fatima's eyes. He had lived every one of his days intensely since he had left home so long ago. If he died tomorrow, he would already have seen more than other shepherds and was proud of that. Suddenly he heard a thundering sound, and he was thrown to the ground by a wind such as he had never known. The area was swirling in dust so intense that it hid the moon from view. Before him was an enormous white horse, rearing over him with frightening screams. When the blinding dust had settled a bit, the boy trembled at what he saw. Astride the animal was a horseman dressed completely in black, with a falcon perched on his left shoulder. He wore a turban, and his entire face, except for his eyes, was covered with a black kerchief. He appeared to be a messenger from the desert, but his presence was much more powerful than that of a mere messenger. The strange horseman drew an enormous curved sword from a scabbard mounted on his saddle. The steel of its blade glinted in the light of the moon. "Who dares to read the meaning of the flight of hawks?" he demanded, so loudly that his words seemed to echo through the 50,000 palm trees of Al-Fayoum. "It is I who dared to do so," said the boy. He was reminded of the image of Santiago Matamoros, mounted on his white horse, with the infidels beneath his hooves. This man looked exactly the same, except that now the roles were reversed. "It is I who dare to do so," he repeated, and he lowered his head to receive a blow from the sword. "Many lives will be saved because I was able to see through to the soul of the world." The sword didn't fall. Instead, the stranger lowered it slowly until the point touched the boy's forehead. It drew a droplet of blood. The horseman was completely immobile, as was the boy. It didn't even occur to the boy to flee. In his heart, he felt a strange sense of joy. He was about to die in pursuit of his personal legend, and for Fatima. The omens had been true after all. Here he was, face to face with his enemy, but there was no need to be concerned about dying. The soul of the world awaited him, and he would soon be part of it. And tomorrow his enemy would also be part of that soul. The stranger continued to hold the sword at the boy's forehead. "Why did you read the flight of the birds?" "I read only what the birds wanted to tell me. They wanted to save the oasis. Tomorrow all of you will die, because there are more men at the oasis than you have." The sword remained where it was. "Who are you to change what Allah has willed?" "Allah created the armies, and he also created the hawks. Allah taught me the language of the birds." "Everything has been written by the same hand," the boy said, remembering the camel driver's words. The stranger withdrew the sword from the boy's forehead, and the boy felt immensely relieved. But he still couldn't flee. "Be careful with your prognostications," said the stranger. "When something is written, there is no way to change it." "All I saw was an army," said the boy. "I didn't see the outcome of the battle." The stranger seemed satisfied with the answer, but he kept the sword in his hand. "What is a stranger doing in a strange land?" "I am following my personal legend. It is not something that you would understand." The stranger placed his sword in its scabbard, and the boy relaxed. "I had to test your courage," the stranger said. "Courage is the quality most essential to understanding the language of the world." The boy was surprised. The stranger was speaking of things that very few people knew about. "You must not let up, even after having come so far," he continued. "You must love the desert, but never trust it completely, because the desert tests all men. It challenges every step and kills those who become distracted." What he said reminded the boy of the old king. If the warriors come here, and your head is still on your shoulders at sunset, come and find me, said the stranger. The same hand that had brandished the sword now held a whip. The horse reared again, raising a cloud of dust. "Where do you live?" shouted the boy as the horseman rode away. The hand with the whip pointed to the south. The boy had met the alchemist.